Castlevania is undoubtedly iconic in like 100 different ways. Between an insane amount of games, a successful Netflix animated show, and even an entire genre that borrows half of its name from the series, I'm sure I don't need to convince anyone of how influential Castlevania's been. But you know, I'm gonna try anyways, because that's kind of my whole deal. And when an older game like the original Castlevania shaped decades of horror games, as well as with the very idea of what it means for a game to be difficult, I think it's worth taking the trip back down in time to put it all into context.
And in the case of the first Castlevania, there's so much additional context because of how much my relationship to the Castlevania series has changed since the original episode. But hey, that's exactly why I'm doing this, the Completionist New Game Plus, where I am recompleting the original 120 games I ever featured here on the channel. Now, when I did the original episode, I didn't have all that much of experience with Castlevania on the NES, and was a little surprised at how much it kicked my ass, and by how much there is to know about the series, dating all the way back to this first game right here. But that's exactly why I had a special guest for that episode as a part of my special of series known as the Month of Collaborations. It helped that he knew the NES pretty well, so even though I was kind of a Castlevania novice, I had the assistance of Pat the NES Punk.
Who's a cute Donkey Kong? You're a cute Donkey Kong, yes you are. Oh hey there, Gerard. It's been quite a while. I think you said my name, you must have, right?
Well, hey man, yeah, that's a thing, right? When you just say someone's name and suddenly they just appear on your videos?
Yeah, weird internet tech we got here. The last time this happened, you were talking about Castlevania. You talking about Castlevania? Again?
I mean, yeah, I know it's been a while since the last episode, but I feel like I actually have way more to say about it this time around. Want to help me take down Dracula once again, just like old times?
Actually, I'm kind of in the middle of something right now. No, you know what? Yeah, I'm free.
And the battle continues! This could turn it all around! This bout will determine who is the strongest once and for all!
When I first played Castlevania in the very early days of the show, I was very unfamiliar with the whole vibe, let alone franchise of Castlevania, and I found it pretty dang difficult. But in the years since, I have played a lot of games like it, including standouts in the series like Symphony of the Night, Rondo of Blood, and even the remake of Castlevania 1, Super Castlevania 4. But I'm kind of glad that I started with the original because it set a template for my relationship with this series.
I'm glad you mentioned horror movies earlier, because that's a large part of Castlevania's overall identity. It was a conscious attempt on the part of Konami to produce a game that was cinematic and spooky, which was a real challenge given the limitations of the time. It got as close as you could to generating real tension for the player, and did that mostly through punishing and exacting gameplay. I obviously loved the NES, but prior to Castlevania in 1987, atmospheric isn't a word that could be applied to that many games. However, Castlevania set a mold, and was soon followed by two NES sequels, Simon's Quest and Dracula's Curse. It would take a long time for the series to slow down, with a new Castlevania game popping up almost every year or two until the 2010s, when it subtly slowed way down.
And it's a shame too, because there's still such a large community that loves this series. And while there are plenty of other games that scratch a similar itch, there's just something about the old school vampire killing iconography of this series that sticks in your brain. I mean, there's a reason that there's a successful animated show, or that Simon and Richter got to pop up in Smash Ultimate. And it all dates back to this very first game, which was light on story, but heavy on iconic characters, locations, and enemies. When it comes to story though, the plot is basically kill Dracula, which, yeah, that tracks. Like many NES games of the time, the story is communicated largely through gameplay and level design, and starts you off by throwing the character of Simon Belmont in front of Dracula's castle. Here you are, just go for it.
And it's honestly enough. The big spooky castle alerts you right away as to what the stakes are. Stakes? Get it? Castlevania, stake through the heart, Dracula. And if that's not enough to put you on edge, then the gameplay and controls immediately establish how difficult Simon's journey to defeat Dracula is going to be. There's the iconic whip, with slightly delayed timing that you have to get used to, a jump that requires you to be super precise, and various sub-weapons. some that are precarious to use. Not to mention all the flying Medusa heads, oh I hate them, and other frustrating enemies, or the boss fights against iconic villains like the Mummy, Frankenstein, and Dracula himself. These are all famous Universal film monsters. And hey, would you look at that title screen? Why, it looks like a film reel. What a coincidence!
Actually, Pat, that was the name of the scientist. The famous creature is known as the Mummy's Monster.
Actually... Oh, you were joking.
But that simplicity is one of the things that makes the game so iconic and great. Fight your way through a castle with a whip, killing classic monsters along the way, and that's really all you need. Later games obviously built out and expanded all of this, but the core of what makes Castlevania so memorable was that it was all there from the very beginning, including how damn hard it is. As an NES game, Castlevania is fairly short and to the point, but I still struggled with it a little bit last time, especially with the second playthrough on hard mode. So although I'm expecting it to be much easier this time around, there's still a decent chance that Dracula is going to kick my ass a few times before I slay him for good.
I mean, Dracula is supposed to kick your ass, right? He sucks blood and lives forever. Kind of a tough dude, but I'm sure you'll be fine, even if this game doesn't have 1,000 side quests or shiny doodads to collect. I know how much you love collecting stuff, completing everything there is to do in a game, unless your name is a coincidence.
I really, really do, but this time, all I'm here to collect is Dracula's ass. Wait, that didn't sound right. Let me try one more time. All I'm here to collect is Dracula's ass. I hate these. Hold on, one more time. All I'm here to collect is Dracula's ass. I'm the Dracula ass collector. There are lots of New Game Plus games where, upon revisiting them, my thoughts and feelings have changed. This is the first one in a long while where I can remember coming back to it feeling like riding a bike or being at home or some other metaphor. I had a rough go at it last time, but I am so much more in tune with the general vibes and gameplay this time around. It's allowed me to see this game in the larger context. It's still a great game all on its own, but now I'm able to see how it set a template for not just the entire horror game genre or the platforming subgenre of Metroidvanias, but also for the entire idea of what it means for a game to be punishing and precise.
It's true. Castlevania demands a level of precision when it comes to timing your jumps and whip attacks that would probably be kind of frustrating out of context, but that serves its purpose in integrating a feeling of difficulty with a sense of dread. Like you mentioned, Castlevania was making a real attempt to be a horror game without most of the tools that modern survival horror games have at their disposal. So the challenge ends up being part of what makes Castlevania feel scary to play. Combined with the impressively ominous design of the castle and stage layouts, it conjures a feeling in which you could die as soon as you minorly mess up, creating a false sense of allure and capturing the tense fear that you'd feel if you were actually exploring Dracula's castle. Well, except you really probably couldn't find meat hidden in walls.
And you can see that influence everywhere, beyond the 2D platformers that were directly inspired by it. Pretty much the entire success of the Dark Souls games and all their derivatives is due to the same trick, pairing vaguely spooky surroundings with hyper-difficult gameplay in order to create more than just one type of fear. Within Castlevania, there are 18 levels divided up into 6 blocks of 3, each with a boss fight at the end. There's also a timer for each block, and each time I died, I started back at the beginning of said block, instead of the level. So there's at least that, but it's still nerve-wracking, especially if you're late in a block, because doing it again pretty much always sounds like a stressful time. Beating a boss gives you your health back though, which was a little less of a relief this time because I felt way more comfortable, but was a real lifeline the first time around.
And when it comes to those monster bosses, they're probably the most iconic part of the game. Using famous monsters is a quick way to establish a classic horror atmosphere, but honestly, it's one that absolutely works. Each of the boss fights feels high stakes, not just since death will set the player back to earlier in the stage, but also because fighting iconic foes like Frankenstein and Dracula feels like an important battle.
Actually, that's the name of the doctor again? You're thinking of Dracula's monster.
Actually? Wait. Oh, you're kidding again. Oh, you. But also, we probably should discuss the Dracula fight in detail because it's one of the most famous set pieces from the game. With good reason. I mean, you already mentioned Simon and Richter's appearance in Smash Brothers, but this NES fight received its own entire stage.
It's true, and while that whole game was influential, that last boss fight in particular is a masterclass in boss fight design. Hell, it may even be one of the most memorable moments in gaming history. It's also also easily one of the most difficult and time-consuming parts of the game for me, which means that when I think about Castlevania, it's that fight that my brain automatically jumps to. Fortunately, I know the pattern's much better now this time around, so I didn't have as rough as a time with it as I did many years ago, but it still probably caused more deaths than the rest of the game combined. Fortunately, the game knows what a big deal this last fight is and puts a checkpoint right before it.
The feeling of walking up those steps to face Dracula has never stopped feeling creepy but cool, even after an endless number of permutations throughout the series. But for an NES game, it really gives that, oh shit feeling of entering a boss room with the knowledge that he's about to mess you up, more so than most bosses had in NES games up to that point. You just never forget the first time you faced Dracula. It's like the first time you rode a bike, first time you tasted ice cream, or tied your shoes, or threw your controller across the room because Dracula killed you so many times.
And on top of that, there are numerous non-Dracula moments that have also become enduring icons, like the obnoxious Medusa heads that fly around, or the axes, crosses, and holy water that Simon can throw as special weapons. I've already mentioned that these elements have survived the passage of time through things like the Netflix series or Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but I think it's worth talking about why these images endured.
Is it because they're good?
Yes, it's because they're good, and because they established an atmosphere and world that would serve as one of the backbones of the entire medium for the decades to come. Titles of best Castlevania game probably go to Symphony of the Night, or maybe even Rondo of Blood, in which the tropes and gameplay had more time to solidify, eventually forming into what we now call Metroidvanias. But the first Castlevania might still be the most Castlevania, with its simple monster whipping Dracula killing action carrying all the way into the future.
I agree. Castlevania on the NES laid the groundwork for so many qualities that we now recognize in game after game. It's even more impressive given the limitations under which it was able to create a tense and foreboding atmosphere. However, a moody and excellent soundtrack by Kinuyo Yamashita really helped set the proper tone.
Actually, Pat, a soundtrack of Castlevania was made by James Banana.
Wait, what? Oh, you are referring to the goofy endgame credits, where cast and game designers are, for example, cited as Bela Lugosi instead of actor Bela Lugosi, or Bram Stoker instead of author Bram Stoker. It's quirky and cute. Even on hard difficulty, the game still feels fair within the confines of what it's established. Later games would expand the world and characters to a much larger degree, but Castlevania on the NES did it all with just one creepy castle and a handful of those floating Medusa heads.
After a decade of playing these games, going back to the first one truly felt great. I was wildly unprepared last time, but now I get it, because since then I've been trained by now by almost hundreds of games that now live in Castlevania's spooky shadow. When it comes to classic NES games like Castlevania, it would be foolish to expect much in the way of completion rewards. There's not really anything to collect here, or any secret levels, or anything like that. Oh, okay, fine. There are some hidden crowns that you can get that gets you a bunch of points, but that's it. Although beating the game once does unlock hard mode, which I guess kind of counts as a completion reward, so there is that.
Yeah, winning lands the player back at Dracula's front door with the daunting challenge of having to do it all over again, only this time with more enemies, some of which might move faster or inflict way more damage than the first time. And then defeating hard mode loops it back to the beginning again with things now slightly harder again. Looping through the game endlessly doesn't really get you anything beyond the existential dread of facing the undead Dracula over and over and over and over.
And since it is an endless loop, that also means there isn't even really an end screen or anything by which to mark the accomplishment, which is fine. It's just that my brain has been rewired to demand some sort of trophy or little star or something on the home screen, but expecting that from an NES game is kind of silly, and I get why it loops never-endingly.
I mean, it is an NES game. They were simpler times. I'm sorry there's no platinum for you to unlock, no dozens of shiny achievements to take away all your free time. You play the game, you beat Dracula, then you go ride your bike with your friends to go buy baseball cards or whatever else kids in the late 80s used to do. I mean, I was a kid in the late 80s, wasn't I?
It's okay. I'll get over it. Honestly, I could use the break. Going back to Castlevania after all this time is its own prize, and it genuinely did feel like being rewarded for a decade of playing this series by getting to see the full scope of how cool the first game is. While I completed Castlevania for the NES, there were around 34 deaths, a few of which were bullshit jumping deaths, but most of which happened during the Dracula fight in both playthroughs. Last time I played it through, there were way more, but they were still mostly in those Dracula fights, which makes sense. He is Dracula, he should be scary.
18 levels completed twice, one in each playthrough. And those levels are divided up into 6 blocks, each with its own boss monster and music. I'm assuming those stats are the same as they were last time, because if that somehow changed, it would be very unsettling, and not in the way that the game is trying to be. I'd be really concerned, truly, terrified.
6 total hours of playtime across both playthroughs, which is probably a few hours less than it took before, just because I am so much more familiar this time around, and it took me fewer tries to be Dracula himself. It's a quick game, but it's still relatively meaty for the type of game that it is, so overall, I'm pretty happy with the 6 hours.
And an uncountable number of those frickin' flying Medusa heads, because when it comes to Castlevania, the hits start coming, and they literally don't stop coming.
Castlevania is as iconic as it's ever been, and while I'd kill for more new games in this series, it was actually kind of awesome to return all the way back to the beginning and discover just how comfortable this game now feels to me. And thank you to Pat the NES Punk for joining me to talk about this game once again.
Of course, Gerard. Thanks for summoning me by saying my name, and for letting me join you in gushing about how great this game is. I'm always down to talk about NES games, obviously, but that's especially true with my buddy the Completionist. Speaking of NES games, did you know that I wrote a book that has reviews of every single NES game? There's also one covering every Super NES game that Gerard, you, wrote the foreword for. You can check them both out at ultimatenintendo.com. These are heavy.
Castlevania is a hard enough game that beating it once will probably feel like more than enough for an accomplishment. And since beating it on hard mode just loops you back to the very beginning of the game again, I can't really see any reason to make yourself keep going through this loop, especially with so many other Castlevania games to choose from. But it's more than worth getting to experience that legendary boss fight against Dracula. So, with that in mind, guys, we still give this game our completionist rating of Finish it.
Finish it!